Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Thank you, Bob, for reading that. So we are continuing with our series, What Disciples Do. Because we've been talking about the fact that being a disciple is not just about believing certain things, but it's about letting those beliefs influence the way that we live our lives, following Jesus and his teachings. And today we're going to talk about the fact that disciples make the best of Babylon. I want to give you a little historical context here of what when Jeremiah is writing. So if you remember, God brings the Hebrew people out of Egypt, out of slavery in Egypt. They wander through the wilderness. They go into the promised land. They conquer the promised land. For a period of time, they are ruled by judges. After a while, they decide they want a king. And so they get a king, and they have this united kingdom of all 12 tribes that lasts for exactly 3 generations. After which, the kingdom splits. It splits into the larger northern kingdom, which is made up of 10 of those tribes, called Israel, and the smaller southern country of Judah, made up of the other 2 tribes. So as Jeremiah writes today, the northern kingdom, the bigger kingdom, Israel, actually got destroyed about 120 years ago by Assyria. Assyria came in, carried people off into exile. Basically, those tribes kind of disappear into history. We aren't sure exactly what happens to them. The few that get left behind, Assyria imports people from outside to resettle the land, and they intermarry with those few Israelites who are left, and those become the Samaritans. Remember the Samaritans? Not very well-liked people, right? So we're about 120 years after Assyria has conquered the northern kingdom. We're at approximately 597. So Assyria is not in power anymore. Now Babylon is the big power in the region, and they kind of control everybody. Well, in 597, the king of Judah rebels. And so Babylon comes in, and they take him out of power. They carry him off. They carry most of the leaders of Judah off into exile, and put another king on the throne. They do this. Zedekiah is the king that they place, and so these exiles go to Babylon basically kind of as hostages to make sure that Judah is not going to rebel again, because now we have some of your people. There are going to be, though, other rebellions, unfortunately. In 587, Babylon ends up coming back and completely destroying the city, razing the temple. But when Jeremiah writes this, we are in that intervening time, when that first group of people have gone off into exile. And do y'all remember dueling banjos? We have kind of dueling prophets in this part of Jeremiah, because there's this prophet Hananiah that's saying to the people who are in exile, you know what? 2 years from now, Babylon's going to fall down. You're all going to go home. Jeremiah is saying no. That's not what's going to happen. Jeremiah is saying, you're going to be here for 70 years. You need to settle down. You need to make yourselves at home and get used to being here. If you try to revolt again, it's just going to lead to annihilation. And so Jeremiah gives them some specific instructions for settling down where they are, which we just heard. First of all, he tells them, live. Settle down, build houses, plant gardens, form community. Second, he tells them, multiply and increase, have children, marry, get your children married so you have grandkids, continue to increase and multiply. Then he tells them to seek the welfare, seek the peace, seek the shalom of the people around them. You're going to be there for a while, so whatever happens to the people around you, if it's good, that's going to benefit you. If it's bad, that's not going to benefit you, right? And then he says, pray for your captors. Yeah, that one's kind of hard, right? He's saying this to people who are living in the enemy capital. But he's saying pray for these people. That he's asking them to have a more expansive view of God, that God is not just the God of their nation, but that God is the God of the world, of all of the nations. He's saying pray for your enemies. And we hear that repeatedly, right, in the New Testament. Jesus says it, Paul says it, James says it. So apparently it's something we still need to keep practicing. Now there's something, though, that Jeremiah does not encourage them to do. He doesn't encourage them to assimilate into the Babylonian culture, right? He says, he tells them, be careful not to cross the line from being your own culture within the wider culture into just accepting the assumptions and values of the culture that you're a part of. He wants them to build homes and institutions that foster their Jewish identity in the midst of this alien culture. So make community, but don't get co-opted by the larger community. And that can be a lesson for us as well, that we are in a broader culture, but as Christians, our lives, the way we live, is called to adhere to Christian values and Christian ways of being, the ways that Jesus taught, not necessarily the way that the larger culture teaches us to behave. But Jeremiah says, and most of you probably know this verse, and this is just a few verses on from what we read. My guess is most of you know this verse, but we don't always realize the context in which it was spoken. Right? He's speaking to these exiles, where Jeremiah quotes God and says, for surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. Jeremiah offers in the midst of exile this word of hope that God is going to be faithful, that God wants good and blessing for you. But it is within the context of exile. And you know, the thing is that some good did actually come from this period. And the people learned that worship could happen anywhere. That they could worship even if they weren't where the temple was. The people learned that they could gather no matter where they were and that God would be there. Much of the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, was written down during this period. A lot of it had just been passed on orally and was scattered in different writings. But it was brought together, and much of the final form of what we have as the Old Testament came together during this time because they were in another place. They needed to preserve it in some way. It was during this time that synagogues became a vital part of the community. So there was this major shift in what it looked like to live out their Jewish faith. Does that sound familiar? Do we as the church see that there in our current time is a major shift in what it looks like to be the church? You know, sometimes the news that we need to hear is not the news that we want to hear. Usually. That's true. So, you know, maybe you go to the doctor and you get an overall really pretty good report, but he said, but, you know, you really need to cut your carbs back. Give up some of the pasta and the pizza. Or you go to your financial advisor and they say, you know, you're on target pretty well, but maybe you need to quit eating out so much and cook at home more, right? You're a healthy congregation, but things are not going to be the way that they were before. Jeremiah is basically saying to the people that they need to quit fantasizing about going back. Instead, to make the most of what they have. You know, the truth is that the perfect job, the perfect spouse, the perfect church, the perfect house, the perfect school, none of those things exist. Nothing is perfect. I remember an old joke. I thought about going and starting a new perfect church, but then I realized I'd be there and it wouldn't be perfect anymore. There is no such thing as perfect situation. There never has been and there never will be. So we have to quit fantasizing about living a perfect life somewhere else and start living fully right where we are. Live fully where you are. Redeem the circumstances that you find yourself in. This is where we are. Pray for the community. Seek to bless the community. Sometimes when we find ourselves in a difficult situation, some type of exile, what needs adjusting is not necessarily those circumstances, but our attitude. Judah's circumstances were not going to change. They had to deal with the fact that they had been through a war, that they had been defeated, that they had been sent into exile. And that wasn't going to change. But the way that they behaved, the way that they lived in that situation could change. For us, we all face those places in our lives where things are maybe not as we would like them to be. Maybe we're getting older and we can't do some of the things we used to do. Maybe we have health issues that make it hard for us to do the things that we want. Maybe we are facing a job loss. Or maybe there are struggles in the relationships around us with those that we love. When we think about the church, maybe there are fewer numbers, less money, less prestige. And sometimes those things are not going to change dramatically. And we need to make the best of them. We need to continue to be faithful, even if we are not successful in the way that the world defines success. And we in the church are often guilty of looking back and saying, well, if it was only like then. But sometimes we don't really stop and think about what it is we're fantasizing about. So most of us, when we fantasize about church, we're fantasizing about probably the 1950s to the 1970s, right? But and we, and yet some of you who were born after that don't even ever have that experience, right? We look back and we tend to idealize those times. But during those times, I wouldn't be up here preaching. In fact, we wouldn't even have women up here serving communion or leading worship. That's the kind of church I grew up in. Divorcees were excluded from church life, from leadership and serving. I remember, and I was probably a teenager or young 20-something in my home church, and there was a big to-do because one of the guys who'd been on the deacons and everything, his wife left him and they got divorced, and the rules were, couldn't serve in leadership, right? Back then, the church by many was seen as a country club or a networking opportunity. If you wanted a promotion at work, you found out where your boss went to work or went to church, and you go worship with them, right? Schools and neighborhoods and churches were segregated. They're still, let's be honest, fairly segregated, but less so than they were then. So when we look back, we tend to idealize certain things and we tend to forget other things. What were we? We were big numbers and a big building, right? At one time. And I have heard people voice sentiments that they feel like we are in exile here. That somehow we are less than because of where we are. I've heard people say, well, when we were still back at the other church, well, if we can't attract people with our big, beautiful building here, how are we ever going to attract them? But you know what? It's our lives our building that's meant to attract people to Christ. I've heard people say, well, we're never going to grow because we have to come in the back door. Okay, what door did we come in on Ironwood? How many of you ever went in the front door? The early church worshipped in the catacombs, right? Tunnels where there were dead bodies. And yet the church grew. Jeremiah has a message not only for the people of his time, but for the people of our time as well. We are not going back to the way things were anytime soon. So, what are we supposed to do? Create community here. Multiply and increase here. Seek the welfare of those around you.
Here.
Pray for those around you.
Here.
Here. What's in the past is gone. And something new is being born. The truth is that Christendom, the idea that everybody is a Christian, that has ended. Something new is emerging. What will take its place? I don't think any of us know yet. But Jesus did say, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So the church will continue. It may not look the way we're used to it looking, but it will continue. We are in a difficult time because we're living in that in-between time, right? Where we're not what we were, and we haven't figured out what we're going to be. We're on a journey. Things are changing. And so we have to figure out a new normal. And Jeremiah says we need to put down roots and live productive lives and pray for the place where we are. New life can only come when we say goodbye to the old life. The people in Jeremiah's time needed to let go and move forward where they were. They needed to continue to be the people of God where they were. One more. There we go. All right. So, there were some things they needed to have a funeral for. Some things they needed to let go of. They needed to let go of Jerusalem and the temple and the family homestead and King Zedekiah. They needed to let go of those things. They needed to put those things behind them because Jeremiah says you're not going back there. But they had things that they got to take with them. Right? They had their fertility as a people. They had family and friends. They had food and shelter. They had well-being and productivity. They had faith in God. All of those things were with them, even in Babylon. So how about us? What's over? What is dead? What old ideas or dreams do we need to let go of? On the other hand, what's still in front of us? What will we need for this journey, this new journey that we are heading out on? What do we already have that we can take with us? What good might come out of this period of exile, this time of transition? Today's empires look different, perhaps, than Babylon, and yet in some ways, maybe not so much. We live in empires of fear and materialism, militarism, consumerism, a time of increasing secularism where there are threats of terrorism and economic uncertainty. People need a word of hope. They need to hear God's message of hope. And we need to be God's messengers here. We are called to see ourselves as resident aliens, a colony of heaven, an island of one culture in the middle of another. We are meant to be a light in the dark, not a conquering empire. Those are the times the church has gotten into trouble. Think Crusades, think Inquisition, think Age of Discovery, right? When the church aligns with power, when it becomes too powerful, it forgets what it's supposed to be. We are called to be a place where the values of home, the values of our Father, are passed on to the young, where our language and lifestyle are nurtured and reinforced, so that we can go out and seek the welfare of the broader culture. A culture where the neighbors down the street may not look like us, they may not talk like us, they may not worship like us. There are a lot of ways that you, First Baptist Church, work for the welfare of the greater culture and the greater world. Bob just held up a whole insert of groups that we support, right? We are starting new programs like Junior Chefs to help students at Jackson Middle School who are food insecure to have the skills to be able to fix food when they're at home and their parents are at work. We support missionaries around the world. We support missions here in our very own city. Broadway Christian Parish, Lovability, so many others. Who do we need to pray for? You know, as I was thinking about this and about praying for your enemies, the question that came to my mind is, who are those I don't want to pray for? Those are probably the people I very much need to be praying for, right? We are Christians in a post-Christendom culture. And God calls us to bloom where we are planted, to be a presence. Because like the people of Jeremiah's time, God has a plan for our future. A plan that is to be filled with, a future that is to be filled with hope and blessing as we seek to bless those around us. Amen. All right.